Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the Harborne Islamic Study Circle HISC Seerah session 222, following on from the previous session which we did way back, I think before Eid, but inshallah we'll be back on a regular basis, and following on from the Seerah we'll have a slightly new and improved format and different ways of doing things, and we'll go through other things which I'll explain later on. But I think today is actually the 16th anniversary when I started the Islamic Study Circle back in 2007. But we'll talk more about that later on. And alhamdulillah, Allah's blessed us with the ability to go through the Seerah and lots of other things that we've done in the past, and all the barakah that flows from that, and all the other spin-offs and all the other things that have happened through the study circle. Alhamdulillah, we're thankful to Allah for that, and pray that Allah allows us to finish the Seerah and to continue with other aspects of studying and talking about Islam. So without further ado, just a very quick recap of the last session, which is available online. So just click on the Harborne Islamic Study Circle YouTube channel and see the last session. So essentially the last session, we talked about how the Prophet ﷺ was ill, and then how he got slightly better. And this is on Monday, the 12th of Rabi Al-Awwal. At Fajr time, the Prophet ﷺ pulled back the curtain. He saw the Ummah praying, and then there was a buzz in the congregation because they felt the Prophet ﷺ was now getting better after this prolonged illness. But we mentioned how Abbas predicted that the Prophet ﷺ would pass away within 3 days. He had this sort of intuition looking at the Prophet in the final stages of death. And then we talked about how the Prophet ﷺ, he called his daughter Fatima and told her secretly that she would die, and then she cried, and that she would soon be with him. And then she was happy and she laughed. He said that he would die, and then she cried, and then he mentioned that she would meet him, and then she was happy and laughed. And then he bade farewell to all his other wives and his grandsons, and then the fever started up again. And then in that sort of final fever, when he was having the final pangs of death, Sakrat al-Maut, the Prophet ﷺ then asked Allah for forgiveness and asked for Allah's help in this testing time. We mentioned how Osama bin Zayd came to visit because he was camped outside Medina. The Prophet ﷺ made dua for him. We talked about how Abdurrahman ibn Abu Bakr came in and had a miswak, and the Prophet ﷺ gestured towards it, and he used that with vigor, as if he's waiting to meet somebody. And then whilst in the arms of Aishah, the Prophet ﷺ raised up his eyes and said that he wanted to be with the Nabiyeen, the Siddiqeen, the Shuhada, and the Salihin. And his final words were, in translation, "Oh Allah, forgive me, have mercy on me, and allow me to be with Rafiq al-Ala." And then he passed away. And then with that, Aisha, who was cradling him in her lap, she screamed. And then Prophet's daughter Fatima rushed in from next door, and there was a general state of shock and despair amongst the Ummah, because they'd sort of seen him at Fajr time, and they thought, well, actually, things are on the mend. So people were starting to go about their normal activities and business, and then this happened. So we'll pick up from there, and inshallah we'll talk about what happened next in terms of how the community reacted, and essentially the appointment of Abu Bakr as the first Khalif, because that happened first before they started to prepare the body for burial and bury the body. So we'll just go into that now, as mentioned. And so obviously, having said the Prophet, he passed away, and then there's this sense of shock amongst the community. And again, like I mentioned at the outset, the Prophet he died on Monday the 12th of Rabi Al-Awwal, and this is in the 11th year of Hijrah, and he was 63 and a few days old, some say, when he died. There are other sort of narrations or indications in scripture that say that prophets are born and sort of die on the same day. But anyway, the Prophet after having sort of passed away, the people who a lot of the people who were waiting in sort of in a vigil in the mosque, they were dispersing after Fajr because they felt the Prophet was getting better. And amongst those people was Usama ibn Zayd. He went back to the camp where the army was, and they were getting ready to march out. And amongst them were some of the Sahabi like Umar ibn al-Khattab, Abu Bakr, because again, he's been leading the prayers for a few days, and he was staying in the mosque as well. Having seen the Prophet get better, he went back to his other house outside of sort of the inner city to spend time with one of his other wives in the sort of district of Sun, and he was there when news started to spread that the Prophet had actually passed away. So news then reached Usama ibn Zayd and the army and the camp out there, and obviously there's a sense of shock and disbelief. So Usama, being in charge of the army, he allowed people to come back to Medina to check out the news for themselves, because there is this sense of grief, of panic, of shock amongst the whole community. And so when Umar he enters into the masjid, and he's himself is in a state of bewilderment, and he refused to acknowledge the fact that the Prophet had died, and he had this idea in his mind that, and again he later on corrected it, but he misinterpreted some of the verses in the Qur'an, which he felt meant that the Prophet would outlive all of the Sahabi for a few generations until things were settled. So that was his belief, and he had this other sense where he felt that the Prophet would not go until he'd killed or sorted out all the hypocrites, all the munafiqeen. So because of that, and because the Prophet had been getting better, he was just in this complete shock and bewilderment, and he was marching around the masjid, and he was shouting at people, and he didn't have his sword with him, but he was his normal sort of swagger, saying, if anyone claims that the Prophet has died, I will sort them out. He's not died. The Prophet he's just in a coma. He's just gone to meet Allah for 40 days like Musa went, and then he'll come back. So he kept repeating that, and obviously the congregation doesn't know what to do, where to go, and they're just hearing Umar say these types of things. Then, whilst Umar's saying these things in the masjid, Abu Bakr Siddiq, he returns back on horseback from Sun, and then sort of he goes direct to his daughter's house, Aishah's house, where the Prophet was. He saw the Prophet lying there with his face covered. He drew back the cloak covering the face of the Prophet. He gazed at the Prophet, kissed him on the forehead, and said, you're dearer than my father and my mother, or I would sacrifice my mother and father for you. And then he continued that you have tasted death, which Allah has decreed for you, and after this you shall not taste death again. And then he gently replaced the cloak on the Prophet's face. And then he can hear the commotion next door, because the Prophet's in the house adjoining the masjid. He hears the commotion in the masjid, and then he walks in, and then he commands Umar to sit down. He says, be gentle, Umar, sit down. And Umar just ignores him. He's just, as I say, he's just in this sort of state of shock. And then Abu Bakr orders him again, sit down, O Umar, and Umar doesn't. And he says it again, and again, Umar's just sort of, wandering around, sort of quite bemused. So then Abu Bakr Siddiq, he steps on the first step of the mimbar, the Prophet's mimbar. He doesn't go to the top, obviously. He just steps on the first step, and then he starts to say, listen to me, listen to hear what I have to say. And then he's shouting that, and obviously the congregation recognizes who Abu Bakr is, his voice, even though Umar is, still sort of ranting, you could say, in the corner. The people gather round Abu Bakr to hear what he has to say. And so Abu Bakr, he has this command, this authority over the people, and then he basically says, and now he who worships Muhammad, let him know that Muhammad has died. But he who worships Allah, he, as in Allah, is ever living, and Allah never dies. And then he goes to say, Allah says in the Qur'an, Muhammad is no more than a messenger, and indeed many messengers have passed away before him. If he dies or is killed, will you then turn back on your heels as disbelievers? And he who turns back on his heels, not the least harm will he do to Allah, and Allah will give reward to those that are grateful. And that's in Surah Al-Ma'idah. That's the opening verses. And again, Surah Al-Ma'idah was revealed after, during the battle, or this verse was revealed, during the battle of Uhud, when there was a lot of confusion around the Prophet ﷺ and his whereabouts, and rumors about his death. And Allah was saying, look, even if he died, is that the end of things? But Ibn Abbas says that by Allah, it sounded as if the people had never heard that verse from the Qur'an until Abu Bakr recited it as a reminder. So the people then, they started reciting it till there was no man who did not recite it. And Umar bin al-Khattab said that as soon as I heard Abu Bakr say it, I fell down to the ground. I felt as if my legs would not be able to carry me, so I collapsed when I heard him say that. Only then did I realize that the Prophet ﷺ had died. And again, there's this state of shock, and and it's only when Abu Bakr, reminded them of, he knows what to say and how to get the message across. So he says this verse, and it's like a bolt of lightning, straight into the hearts of the Muslims there, and it just hits home that the Prophet ﷺ has died. And Allah has mentioned the mortality of the Prophet ﷺ before, and so and it's only when he says that in that context, people then began to sink in. And then you can see it in Umar bin al-Khattab's reaction, his shock and his grief. Only then, when it sort of dawned on him, does he sort of collapse from the realization that the Prophet ﷺ has actually passed away. So again, it's just a really, really powerful sense of the trauma that the Muslims were undergoing at the time of the passing of the Prophet ﷺ's death. It literally was incredible. They could not believe the news, especially after they'd seen him a few hours earlier, Fajr time, pull back the curtain and smile upon them. And so there was that double disbelief around that. And the Prophet ﷺ, he's mentioned before that, if any calamity befalls you as an individual or as an ummah, just remember the calamity of my death, right? And again, this is a prediction, because the Prophet ﷺ, he's not just the prophet for them. He's their teacher. He's their head of state. He's their friend. He's their mentor. He literally is everything for them. And then suddenly he's not there. And the people they were not equipped to deal with that reality. You have this sense when you're living around people that things will go on for a long time, and even if there is just a sudden illness, or if they're away for a while, you always yearn for things to get back to normal. But here, it was just not countenanced that the Prophet would actually die and leave them, and then they would be, lost, as it were. So we'll come back onto that later on, inshallah. So whilst that is going on, the household of the Prophet Ali ibn Abi Talib, along with Zubayr and Talhah, they are with the Prophet in the house of Aishah, and obviously the ladies, the wives are all together. So the house of the Prophet they're looking after the Prophet, or just wondering what to do next. There's a sense of shock in the people in the mosque, and people are literally bereft. And then there are those who are on the outskirts who've got the news, including the Ansar, the Aus and the Khasraj, and there is this sense of crisis amongst them. They don't know what to do. And again, as is sort of tradition amongst the Ansar, when there is a major event or a major calamity or a decision, they gather in this sort of gathering place. It's called the Saqeefa Bani Saadah. So they gather in this big sort of, you could say a village hall type area, and this was where the Ansar would meet on these sort of historic occasions. And again, there's a sense of shock, and they know that's their meeting place. So the Ansar, they started to assemble in the Saqeefa of Bani Saadah, and then sort of obviously they're discussing the death of the Prophet, the passing away of the Prophet, how they're all feeling, and obviously the fact that there's going to be no Prophet, no Prophet after the Prophet, and what's going to happen to them as a community. And so the conversation naturally, in that sense of shock and grief, leads on to, well, what's going to happen now? What do we do now? And then people from amongst the Aus and the Khazraj, they discuss, well, maybe Saad ibn Ubadah, who is the chief amongst them, he should take forward the sort of leadership of the Ummah, because and we'll go on to some of the reasons. And again, it's natural for people in that situation and state to be discussing these types of things, even in this state of shock, because it's what happens now. What do we do now, right? So this conversation starts to happen around, who's going to lead the Ummah next, and then news then reaches the people in the Masjid, Abu Bakr, Umer, and some of the other Sahabi, that the Ansar have all gathered in Saqeefa Bani Saadah, and they're discussing what to do next. And they're possibly even discussing, who's going to succeed the Prophet ﷺ. And so obviously, Abu Bakr realizes the gravity and the magnitude of this situation. He realizes that this is a critical discussion. This is and there needs to be some sort of reconciliation to what happens next, but it needs to be handled in a very delicate way. And his true leadership comes to the fore now, where he instantly recognizes the importance of having to confront these particular questions, and so he gathers sort of a small coterie of sort of high-ranking Sahabi, and he has on the one side Umar ibn al-Khattab, and on the other side Abu Ubaidah. And again, these are two of those who've been promised Jannah in their lifetimes, the Ashra and Mubashra. And he holds their hands and they walk towards the Saqeefa to try and have a discussion with them, and because there's the potential that things could fracture quite soon if things become quite tribal in this. And then obviously there's a lot of discussion when they arrive there. People are saying that it should be the people from the Aus and the Khasraj to take this forward, because this is Medina. It's natural that they've given the help to the Prophet ﷺ, etc., etc. And in the middle was Saad ibn Ubadah. Now, Saad ibn Ubadah, he was recognized as being the most qualified or elder of the Ansar. And we've talked before about the two Saads that were critical in supporting Islam, Saad ibn Mu'adh and Saad ibn Ubadah. And it was Saad ibn Mu'adh who had the higher rank of the two, and he's the one who died after the battle of it died after one of the battles, was it where Khaybar, and Saad ibn Mu'adh, and when he died, it is said, it's narrated that the Arsh, the throne of Allah, shook the news of his passing away, and 70,000 angels came down for his janazah. So that was Saad ibn Mu'adh. Here we have Saad ibn Ubadah, who is again recognized as one of the leaders and chiefs of the Ansar. So he's actually ill. He's wrapped up in a cloak with a fever in the middle of this big hall, and discussions going on around him, and people saying, we're the helpers of Allah, we're the Ansar, and we're the fighting force of Islam, and you are the Muhajir, you're of us, and you are a group that have settled amongst us. And it's through the efforts of the Ansar that we've managed to spread Islam. So people saying that the successor to the Prophet ﷺ, managing the affairs of the Muslims, should be chosen from the Ansar, because it's the Ansar, the Aus and the Khasraj, who've protected Islam. They've offered a home for the Prophet ﷺ and his companions, even though that the Muhajir were persecuted by their own people. And it's right that the Ansar should take the leadership of the Muslims, and it was through the efforts of the Ansar that Islam gained a foothold and was able to spread. And the capital of the Muslim state is Medina, which is obviously where of the Ansar, and so it should be right that an Ansari should be the head of state. So these are valid reasons, and people amongst the Ansar were saying this. Some said that Saad may have said this. Some say that other elders were giving these types of arguments. And as they're giving these arguments, Umar ibn al-Khattab, who's come along with Abu Bakr and Abu Ubaidah, Umar says, "Look, I was working out my response to all of these points. So as these points are being said, I'm trying to rebut these points, and I'm working through in my head what to say, and I need to rebut each of these points. But I know that the way I'll say it may come across quite harsh, but it needs to be said." And he recognized the importance of having that discussion. And again, it's just a recognition that there was no conspiracy around this. This is just naturally these types of things you would expect to happen in once a community has faced a trauma like this. So as the Ansar finish, Umar is about to stand up, and say his piece, then Umar and then Abu Bakr, he grabs him and tells him to sit down. And then Abu Bakr, he stands up and he addresses the people, and he starts off, like a proper politician and leader, by praising the Ansar, and he goes through a long list of the things that go through a long list of some of the hadith of Prophet where the Prophet praises the Ansar, saying, look, if the world walked on one side of the road and the Ansar on the other side of the road, I would walk alongside the Ansar, and all the benefits of the Ansar, and Allah has mentioned them in the Qur'an as well. So Abu Bakr starts off by praising the Ansar and mentioning their elevated status. And again, it's a beautiful way of disarming any tension that there is there. You don't go in to any meeting, just sort of, armed and sort of, bum, 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 and really be really aggressive. There is a way in which, if you want people to listen to you, you address their concerns, but you do it in a polite way and a respectful way. And this was the most respectful way, by highlighting the positives around their position and acknowledging the rights that they have to feel the way they do. Then Abu Bakr Siddiq, he then mentions some other points which are the counterpoint to those things mentioned, and essentially he said, look, this is a really important point for the whole Muslim Ummah. It's not just a concern for the citizens of Medina. This goes wider than Medina. It concerns the whole Muslims, all of the Arabs and all of those who've become Muslims. So we need to have a wider geopolitical perspective on this, rather than a narrow nationalistic perspective. And he said, and again, this is true of the time, that all the Arabs are not likely to accept the leadership of the Ansar. Yes, the Ansar supported the Prophet ﷺ, but in terms of the geopolitics and the tribal allegiances, it would be much harder for them to maintain leadership over some of the Arab tribes because of some of their historical sort of misunderstandings around Islam, especially when they recognize there are differences amongst the Ansar. There's the Aus and the Khasraj, and so you're already potentially introducing fissures within the community. And then Abu Bakr pointed out that under those circumstances, it's a recognition that the Quraish are the custodians of the Kaaba, and that in of itself could provide leadership for the Muslim community and the Ummah, given their preeminent position. And he also mentioned, looking at Saad, saying that you were there, weren't you, O Saad, when the Prophet ﷺ said that this matter, as in the leadership, must be for the Quraish. And then Saad acknowledged that. Again, he needed to be reminded of that, just like the Muslims in the Masjid needed to be reminded of the verses of the Qur'an. Saad needed to be reminded of this saying of the Prophet ﷺ, that the leadership should be amongst the Quraysh. So when Saad acknowledged that, then that sort of was, sorted that issue out. And Saad says, yes, you have spoken the truth, and there's nothing he can say, because obviously this is the words of the Prophet ﷺ. And so then Abu Bakr then sort of appeals to the Ansar and says, oh Ansar, no one can deny the superiority of your position in the religion or the greatness of your eminence in Islam. You were chosen by Allah as the helpers of His religion and His Rasul. To you the Prophet was sent on his Hijrah from Makkah, and from you came the majority of his companions and his wives. Indeed, in position you are next only to the earliest companions, the earliest Sahabi. Right? Therefore, it would be fair if we would take the Emirat and you accept a ministry, you should not obstinate in your stance. We assure you we will do nothing without consulting you. So it's basically just saying, look, that the leadership should really be amongst the Muhajir, and that's where it should be. And then there's some of the others amongst the Ansar, again, who are just caught up in all the emotions of the time and some of the sort of tribalness of the discussions. And it said that someone called Habab bin Mandhar, one of the Ansar, he says that the Amirat was the right of the Ansar and they should not forego that right, and that that shouldn't be a concession to be made in favor of the Muhajir. And how about if they have two Amirs, one from the Ansar, one from the Muhajir? So why don't we have two leaders, one from you guys, one from our guys? And then Umar ibn al-Khattab, he stood up and said, the unity is for Allah alone. There's only one Allah, only one Prophet, only one Qur'an. We are one community. We should only have one Amir. And again, trying to address those points in that gathering in a polite way. And if we have more than one Amir, that will lead to the disintegration of the Muslim community, of the body politic of the Muslims. You will start to have each of the different tribes wanting their own Amir, and then everything would fracture. And so, there was some heated debates, and then Abu Ubaidah, he stood up and he said, "Oh, Ansar, you were the first to help Islam. So do not be the first to take steps towards disintegrating Islam." And again, so the people started to realize that actually, there needs to be a different way out of this. At that point, Abu Bakr, he read the room. He then said, "Allah is our witness that we are not pressing the claim of the Quraish because of any selfish interest. This proposal is based solely on the interest of the solidarity of Islam. To give you a proof positive of our sincerity, I declare before you that I don't want to, be in that office. I don't want to be leader." Here, and he grabbed the hands of Umar and Abu Ubaidah and said, "You choose from amongst these two who you want to lead." And so again, he's stepping back. He's being the main proponent of the discussion, but he's saying, "I'm not doing it on my behalf. I nominate these two people," and that's why he brought alongside two of the Ashra Mubashara, Abu Ubaidah and Umar ibn al-Khattab, well-respected Sahabi, and said, "Choose from amongst these two who you want to be leader." And again, giving people the choice, it doesn't give a sense that things are imposed upon them. Again, fantastic leadership technique. And then Zayd ibn Thabit, one of the Ansar, he said that, in fact, the Holy Prophet ﷺ was amongst the Quraysh. There is considerable force in this proposal that after him, his successor should be selected from amongst the Quraysh. Allah chose the Ansar as helpers, but it is, and that's the role that they should continue to play, the role of helpers. And then another Ansari leader, Bashir bin Saad, he said, "O Ansar, if we have secured a position of superiority in holy wars, in jihad against the polytheists, and gain precedence in the matter of religion, it is with the object of pleasing our Allah and obeying our Prophet. It is not proper for us to make this a ground for self-aggrandizement, for really, we've done enough to, for our worth. We shouldn't push it too much." Then he says, "We should leave our reward to Allah. We must realize that the Prophet ﷺ came from the Quraysh, and the Quraysh have the strongest claim for his succession. We should not quarrel with the Quraysh on this issue." And so there's a sense of agreement now that actually it should be from amongst the Quraysh. And again, this isn't some big conspiracy. This is just naturally how things happened. And again, there's also a recognition, and again, we'll talk about this next week, inshallah, this concept of Ijma-as-Sahabah, consensus of the companions. There is this sense that this particular topic is so important it actually supersedes the obligation of burying a dead person, not just any dead person, burying the Prophet ﷺ, right? So the fact that all the Sahabi were in agreement on within this discussion with no dissenters, it's not as if any of the Sahabi there said, hang on a second, we can't decide this until we bury the Prophet ﷺ. We can't do anything until the Prophet ﷺ is buried. No, they all recognized that the matter of succession was even more important than the burial of the Prophet ﷺ, even though we have so many hadith saying it is an obligation to bury the body of a Muslim as soon as you can. So the fact that there is unanimity, there is ijma amongst the Sahabi, is an indication that this is actually the way to do things. And we'll come on to this next time, inshallah, that this concept of succession comes through ijma, where you have these particular principles of having to choose the next successor within 3 days. And we see this being played out here. So then, we have this sort of now acquiescence amongst the leaders there that it should be from amongst the Quraish. Then Umer, he says this later on. He was really hated the fact that Abu Bakr nominated him, because there's no way he would feel comfortable of leading any group in which there was Abu Bakr. So he turns and he says to the people, "Oh, Abu Bakr, how can I or Abu Ubaidah be preferred to you? You are undoubtedly the most excellent of the Muslims. You were the second of the two in the cave." I'm talking about that in the Hijrah. "You were appointed as Amir al-Hajj. And during his illness, the Prophet ﷺ appointed you as Imam to lead the prayers. Of all the companions, you were the closest and the dearest to the Prophet ﷺ. And you are dear to us. Stretch out your hand so that we may offer allegiance to you. Right? Let me give you bayah." Right? And he turns to the Ansar and says, "Oh, help us. Don't you know that the Messenger of Allah ordered Abu Bakr to lead the prayer?" And they said, "Yes, we know that." "Then which one of you will willingly take precedence over him?" "God forbid that we should take, precedence over Abu Bakr," they all said. And then Umar seized the hand of Abu Bakr and pledged allegiance, as "I give you my bayah." And then Abu Ubaidah, he grabbed Abu Bakr's hand and gave him his pledge. And then it's like, everyone else falls into line. All the other Muhajir, they started joining and giving their bayah, their pledge of allegiance to Abu Bakr at that point in that gathering. And it's said in some narrations that Saad ibn Ubadah also gave his pledge. There are other narrations say that he didn't offer his bayah in that gathering. He did it later on. And some narrations say he didn't do it. He sort of migrated to Syria or something like that. But essentially, it was then agreed that Abu Bakr should take leadership. He would be the next Khalif. He would, take the Pledge of Allegiance. And here you've got the Pledge of Allegiance from the people of influence, the senior people in Medina at the time. And we'll get on to sort of the nitty-gritties of that next week, inshallah. So we'll talk more about the process of succession, what it means to be Khalif or the Bayah, Bayatul Khalif, that's involved in that. And then, inshallah, next week we'll also talk about the burial of the Prophet ﷺ. So now the successor is chosen, the burial and the washing of the body and the preparation for the burial can go ahead. So until then, inshallah, do remember us in your du'as. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Innal insana lafi khusr illa alladhina amanu wa amilu bil haqq wa tawasaw bis sabr. And obviously, if you've got any other questions, comments, or thoughts, do get in touch. And thank you for all those friends who've been in touch in recent weeks and months and asking for when the study circle will start up again, inshallah. So, inshallah, by the grace of Allah, we will continue more regularly, and hopefully Allah allows us to complete the seerah, recap the seerah, and then move on to other aspects, including aspects of leadership of the Prophet ﷺ, and we'll do some of the basics of Islam again, basics of belief, aqidah, of usul al-fiqh, Inshallah, we'll cover these in the coming weeks and months in a slightly different format, inshallah. So, Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum.